Good morning. We continue our journey, our learning of the review of the conclusion of Ayin Beis. And we are on page, let's see, 1415. I want to dedicate this class, tragically, to the horrific murder of the dear Neshama of Tzvi Kogan. If you haven't heard the news, I'm sorry to carry it here. He was murdered in cold blood in the United Arab Emirates. Tzvi HaKohen. What is his father's name? Does it say?
No, I don't know. I know the mother, but not the father.
Yeah, the mother is
Yeah,
Ethel.
Alexander. Tzvi ben Alexander.
Ibn Alexander. Ethel. Who is his mother? What was her mother's? The mother's maiden name?
His mother is Spielman. No, not his mother.
That's his wife.
His wife. Yeah. His wife's grandmother is a sister from Holzberg, Gabi Holzberg.
Yeah. So as sad and tragic as it is, we continue our learning and we continue doing good, and to counter all the negative and all the terrible stuff out there. I actually just recorded a short little video that is going to address the issue. I'm going to probably have it translated into Arabic and Hebrew through AI. So we'll see. But so we honor him, and what shall we say? It just seems very difficult to speak about these things because you think it's finally over, and that you have another story like this. The only thing I can brings up to mind is when Mrs. Lapine was murdered in cold blood here in Crown Heights. We're talking now, 30 years ago. It was 32 years ago. I'm sorry. It was a few weeks before the Rebbe had a stroke, and you could see the pain, anguish, and yet at the same time, we need to build and we need to be stronger and not be defined or identified by any of these negative things, and translate them into a revolution of ultimately bringing Mashiach and goodness and kindness. So our learning is dedicated to the Ili Nishmas, Hashem Yinkam Damai, may God avenge his blood, may they find the perpetrators and the specials behind it, and once for all, let it be a call of what we're dealing with here.
Right.
And Mekana Lahaba Ach Tev Yisrael, we should only have good news and positive things to report, all in good health for all of us, for everyone. Yidden everywhere, especially in Eretz Yisrael, including the hostages,
Wow.
and the soldiers, and all those that need special protection.
Amen.
Okay. So we said on page 15, and of all things, we're learning about Chamisha L'Teva and Chamisha L'Ra. So I know it sounds a little like odd to say this, but he explains here where the root of all evil comes from. And that comes, as he says, as we learned in the previous class, that the word hu is said 5 times in Torah for good, like Avram, hu Avram, and 5 times L'Ra, about bad things, bad people. And the first one, Nimrod, he said. Nimrod was Reshisan hu Nimrod. And where does the negative come from? So he explained that the 2 levels of hu is Hei Chsadim and Hei Gvuras. That's why it's 5. Because we know that Chesed, which is the root of Teva, of goodness and kindness and love, there are 5 types of Chsadim, and L'Ra, 5 types of Gvuras. So even though the Gvuras themselves are Kedusha at their root, it's God's Gvura. It's God's power of judgment or din or tzimtzum or concealment or restraint, however you translate Gvura, there are the Kedusha. And that's why we say the 5 fingers of the right hand is the 5 chesadim, the 5 fingers of the left hand is 5 gvuras. And then he continues and says, but Yenikas HaChitzeinim ultimately comes from the left side. So even though Gvura itself, let's take the Tzimtzum itself, is a concealment, that's not necessarily a bad thing. When God conceals himself or conceals the divine revelation, he's doing so like a teacher who conceals his brilliance in order to allow for the student to have space, to create space for an independent consciousness. So that per se is actually, if you think about it, actually an act of chesed, really. Even though it's called gvura because it's withholding and restraining, but the purpose of it is good, is a gili. Like we learned earlier, the whole purpose of the tzimtzum is gili. However, the side effect of concealment is that if it's misunderstood, it can become the root of Yenikas HaChitzeinim, like he says, that the outer forces, the negative forces, Sitra Achra, we glean their energy and draw energy from there. The famous example, many of you may have heard the Rebbe's talk where he was crying, very appropriate to this this latest event. There was Tu B'Shvat, Tov Shin Lamed Tes, 1979. And the Rebbe brought the mashal. He was talking about Golus and the pain of Golus, and Ad Mosai, how much more can we deal with this, and so on. And when will it all be over? And he brought the mashal of the Magid. Magid of Mizrich gives an example for the Tzimtzum. Aster Ponai, of a father, a parent who conceals himself from his child in order to elicit his ingenuity, the child's ingenuity, that is, to find the father. That was the purpose of it. However, as the Rebbe continued, the father is, of course, he knows how to conceal himself well, to the point that the child is looking and can't find his father. And I remember the Rebbe saying this like today. I remember with tears, he said, Zunti gesucht. Sunday he's looking for him. Monte gesucht, Dinstig gesucht. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday he's looking for his father and doesn't find him. So at some point he gives up. And here's where the Rebbe began to literally sob visibly and said, and who is at fault? It's not the child. The father concealed himself so well that the child can't find him. So why are we blaming the child? And that's what Golus ultimately is. The concealment was in order to bring out our strengths, that we're independent and we can find God. But the concealment could also create a situation where it's misunderstood, or it's so dark that you give up and you think, there's no one there. And that's the story of life in a way. So that's why it's a sherish of Yenikas HaChitzeinim. Sherish of Yenikas HaChitzeinim, because the Chitzeinim can take advantage. Say, oh, God's not present. When he is present, but he's concealed, and he allows for free will, and ultimately that can create some of the worst things that are possible, because if God's unity was completely all-pervasive and all revealed, like before the Tzimtzum, there'd be no room. Besides, there wouldn't be any independence. There'd definitely not room for one person to hurt another, or to do anything that goes against God's plan and God's will, against God's children, hurting someone. So the fact is, this concealment can lead to the worst of the worst. So the Rebbe Rashab is not going to the worst of the worst here. He did discuss it earlier in Ayin Beis, talked about some of the Asari Arugei Malchus and other horrific events throughout history. But here he's just saying is the sherish of Yenikas, the Yenikas Mebchinas Kavas Moel. Because Oyer and Gilui, Chesed, yes, Chesed, too much Chesed can also be a problem. But Chesed doesn't have the problem of Yenikas HaChitzeinim in the sense of the diminishment. We spoke about Avram, Yotzim, and Yishmael, which is also relevant to our discussion, but that's due to too much Chesed. Too much Gvura creates the real darkness, where the maggots and the negative forces fester and dwell. So he says, even with an extended evolution of processes, the process of ishtalshlus, it's still tev, mishum the eira chesed eine mesave, because the eira chesed does not get coarse or thickened. That's chamisha l'teva. I'm reviewing what we learned. V'ashefa, but kava smell, the left side, which is the opposite of chesed. Chesed is a flow, is giving. It's opening up the channels. Gvura is closing them. Restraint, refrain, concealment. Simsum e'er v'ashefa, mishtal shel mazeh, from that evolves hashefa b'klipas nega. The flow into klipas nega. So klipas nega itself is neutral, but it's already concealing the divine. When you eat a meal, even if it's a kosher meal, you're walking in the street, that's klipas nega. Why is it klippa? Because it's not kedusha. It's not shalosh klipas atmeis either. That's only if you use it the wrong way, as he explains in Tanya. But klipas nega it is. How is that possible? Is because ultimately the kava hasmoil, the left side gevura, with the nafesh talshlus, comes the chef of klipas nega. And that's chamisha hein l'ra. That's the 5 times it says who in the negative way, l'ra, for evil. Because they come from b'chinas hegvuris mesef hamadregas. Not hegvuris in their root. In their root, they're kedusha. Hein gvuresav. God's just like God has Shem Kale, which represents chesed, giving. He also has Shem Elikim. Shem Elikim is a holy name. It's a godly name. But Elikim is din and tzimtzum. And from that, b'seif hamadregas, when it's nishtalshal, enough devolution, if you wish, enough concealments can ultimately lead to l'ra. And who's the first of the 5 who that the Medrash says? By Nimrod. Nimrod, the king in the time of Avram Avinu, the Chumash, Shenemer boy, and before Avram, der haflaga, hu haya. Shaya reish v'der haflaga. He was the leader of the generation of haflaga, which was essentially the generation that built, like he says, hafradu machlek v'yischalkus, separation and division, and that is where he built the city and the Tower of Babel to challenge God. Nas Hashem, that they wanted to make a name for themselves, that they are great on their own, basically defying God. So that's why he's the first so-called the Reish, or the Rishisana of the place who. In the parentheses that we learned, he addressed the issue, if he's the source, if he's the king, the leader of separation and division, why do we say that by the day of Flogah they were united? It says, they were united. That's why Hashem said, let's confuse them by changing their languages. Because their unity gave them power. It was a unity of the Ummah. The Ummah can be united in their nefarious and their evil schemes, as we've seen, unfortunately. So what we said there, Pirud, so he explains that that b'chinas achdus the Ummah heper b'chinas achdus the kedusha, ube'emes, in truth, even the achdus and the Ummah is not a true unity. Be'emes zeh b'chinas eschalkus, because ultimately, since they're separate from God, even if they unite between each other as thieves or as criminals, but ultimately, since they're separating from God and God is true unity, it ultimately is not real unity, as he explains. Actually, he doesn't explain that right here. He just said that as a statement. Then he says, V'gam, another point we can make is, Ummah there's no yechida. Because at the end of the day, even when they unite in their schemes and their conspiracies, and their plots and their evil intentions, they're not really one will. It's different interests joining together temporarily. Like I explained on the previous class, so you have people who come together because at the end of the day, they're interested in their own interests. They're not interested in one unified objective. However, right now it's convenient to work together. Like he said, Mashcheni acharecha narutza, Mashcheni loshen yachid, because it's coming from the koya nefesh alikis. Acharecha narutza is lashon abim, because it's why? Because the sense of the nefesh abamis, even though you could say the animal soul, all his desires is just selfish desire, but selfishness by definition means it's selfish for that moment. So it's different zetzenis. It's lashon abim. It's plural, and then the goal is they should all be united. That mashcheni. They're saying, draw me, the nefesh alikis, should create true unity and transform all the ritzenus of the Nefesh Habamis toward a godly purpose. But bottom line is that even the Achdus and Umazeh that appears like unity is not true unity. That's what he's qualifying in the parentheses. And that's why it doesn't last, as we see. Okay, and he also brought Vayikach Keirach, that Keirach separated himself. Also, the idea of separation is spaled from the word hafloged, like here, separating, dividing, schalkus. I'm going to continue now, even though we learned the next line, I'll continue. So that explains the Chamisha L'Ra, starting from Nimrod. Question is, where is this rooted? So we said it's rooted in the Hey Gvuras. But we also saying is the level of who. Now the level of who we learned is the level of Makif, of Seviv Kalaman. That's why it's who, Lashon Ister. It's concealed. And we learned it in a positive way. That Avram, without a Hey, is from Arich, from Chochma of Arich, and it's Nimshach into Avram, who, Avram, from the who, the Nister of Keser, of Makif, it's Nimshach into the Penimi. We learned that in the previous. How does that apply to the negative forces? The negative forces, Makif seems to be a very high level of Kedusha. It's even higher than Mamalakalam. It's about how God is removed from existence. So he's now going to explain the connection to the Hu L'Ra. We learned about the Hu L'Teva. Now the Hu L'Ra. So he says, I'm on the line around a little more than halfway down the page. The line begins, Chulu v'zeu gam ken v'yikach keirach. After the parentheses, that's what I'm reading. And you can find the pages if you want to follow the text. If you don't have the Sefer, the book, at ayinbeis.com. So he says like this, O Mokim, and nevertheless, even though it's hafrades, chalkus, and division, and divisiveness, umekol mokim, and nevertheless, sheirish yinikosam. The word yinika is a key word because, as I explained, yinika is not a full flow. When you're yenik, it means like nursing. You just take a very narrow flow. That's what the chitzenim, like we learned, yinika sachitzenim. So the sheirish yinikosam of this level of hulara, the heg of the negative forces, hu mepchinas hu. It's from the level of who. Hainu mebchinas kama erechapayim lefonov. Let me explain what that means before I read on. So the fact is, Chassidus explains, how is it possible that there can be something that defies God, that goes against? So I explained that the tzimtzum is a key element to this, because the tzimtzum conceals the divine presence, so therefore there's room for it to be misinterpreted and abused and used for the wrong purposes. A concealment that leads to negative things. But it goes deeper than that. The question then is asked, that means that there's a level that in a sense is allowing for negative forces to come into play. Because as the tzimtzum creates the environment that is possible, there's a vacuum. Where there's a vacuum, there's always room for like boireik, ein b'mayim, nechoshev akravim yeshboi. An empty pit, there's no water. The vacuum will attract negative forces. But you have to say that God is allowing that. So Chassidus explains that there's another aspect to Yinika Sachetzenim, that the Makif of which is in a sense removed and aloof, just using that word, I don't know if it's a perfect translation, allows for the possibility for negative forces to come into play. You have the example that during, let's say, the king throws a festive party, so we also know thieves and pickpockets and all kinds of bad players come around because nobody's not watching because of the big simcha. Like I mentioned, the Rebbe's wedding, there were a lot of pickpockets there because everyone's besimcha, so it's like a certain detachment. When you're very meticulously watching everything, which is like mamala kalaman, divine energy that enters into existence, there's less room for that possibility. But that's called chitzenius hamakif. Penimiyus hamakif does not allow for that. So Chassidus explains that there's two reasons for Yenikas HaChetzenim, either due to great concealments or due to the Makif, the Chetzenes HaMakif, that's somewhat like detached or removed for that moment. So therefore, negative forces could also come into play. So when the king, for example, is in great joy, he's not going to be what's the word, discerning about every person who approaches him. And that's when someone can take advantage, so to speak. Now, obviously, we're talking about Hashem. It's not someone's taking advantage, but that's what Chetzein Makif allows. In the Maimer Chazal, the expression is, Kama erech hapayim lefonov. Erech hapayim means how much patience. Erech hapayim, how much, literally erech hapayim means long face, but it means erech hapayim when we always pray to Hashem, that Hashem should forgive us by so-called overlooking our transgressions. What does it mean to overlook? We're not talking about tshuva now. Overlook, we're saying you're above it. So in a way, Kama erech hapayim, there's a certain allowance that God will give even to negative forces. So that's what he's referring to here. Kama erech hapayim l'fanav shebchina zeh nikra hu. So there's hu in Kedusha is Seviv Kalalman, like we spoke before, Chochma of Keser, that's the Makif, the higher level of godliness beyond existence. But there's another side to it, which is the L'umazeh of that Makif. Makif of L'umazeh is the Makif that allows, and is like so-called more patient, and therefore gives more of an allowance that will allow for the Yanika to happen. That's the level of hu. And like it says, where do we find the hu? You say, Racham, the one that's compassionate, Yechaper will forgive. Now, most of us interpret Hu Racham Yechaper in a positive way. That because God's compassionate, he'll forgive us. But if you look at the whole pasuk, like he says right now, he quotes, what does it say before Hu Racham Yechaper? It says, Vayaftuhu bifihem, ubulshenim yichazevu. And then it says, Hu Racham Yechaper. It means, Vayaftuhu means that they seduced with their mouths. They did negative things.
Vaifatuhu.
Yeah, which means like seducing, like that they fool somebody. They what's the word? Persuading, but not stamp persuading with like swindling in a wrong way. Ubeleshenim yichazevu means with their tongues they were yichazevu. They lied. Deceptive. Deceptive is the right word. You have two means when somebody, someone with criminal intentions convinces you of something. He knows how to manipulate you. And then it says Hu Racham Yechaper. V'hainu shagam sherak v'yaftu b'fiem u'kol mokem Hu Racham Yechaper v'hainu gam b'loi tshuva. So he's bringing proof from this, the Rebbe Rashab, that he's not talking about tshuva. Tshuva is one thing. When you do tshuva, so you're saying, Hu Racham Yechaper, that God, because you're compassionate, Yechaper, he'll forgive because you did tshuva. But from the beginning of the pasuk, it's clear that you're talking about someone that has not done tshuva. That even if you b'fim, nevertheless, God Racham Yechaper. Why? Because there's this level of Kama erech hapayim lefonov, that there's a certain amount of allowance, a certain amount of leeway, so to speak, that God will allow, that allows the klippas to be able to draw energy there. However, remember I explained from Tanya, p.1415 Beis, Chav Beis or Chav Aleph, what perek is it? Chav Beis, where he talks about that when the Sitra Achra, how does it get its energy? Hashem wants to give it energy because he wants there to be bechira, free will. So how do they get the energy? They don't get it directly. In Kedusha, you get the energy like someone gives you a gift, face to face, with a smile, and they're happy to give it to you. In Sitra Achra, the Alter Rebbe explains the word Acher, Acherim, Elikim Acherim, is like from the word Acharayim, the back. You throw it over your shoulder. Like it's almost like you're giving it begrudgingly in a way that without any joy in the matter. So you're giving it because you have, so to speak, no choice. Of course, God has choice, but he doesn't want to give it in a direct way because it's not clear. It's klipa. It's not botel telekus. So he says, "Ela shemesham nimshach lemachayis b'derech nefila v'shvira." So the language used for this chassidus is that the chayis they get is not direct. When you give chayis in a positive way, it flows directly, like you're pouring somebody a cup of water from a pitcher. It's not nefila v'shvira. It's a smooth flow. Nefila means you're giving it in a way that's like it's fallen, like you're dropping it, right? Like dropping something, and shvira in a way that's broken. So it's not a regular flow. So they are getting energy, but they're not getting energy in a direct way, because when they get the energy in a time, let's say, of a simcha, where the king is so-called oblivious or removed from the details, it's not because he's giving it to them, it's because there's not kavyochel not noticing. So they're getting it in the form of nefila and shvira. It's like in a indirect way. Al derech sheklipa kedem kodmo lepri or leperi. He's writing it this way. So klipa kodmo lepri. Let's explain what that is. That's from the shalom. So we have in a fruit, using the physical example, a fruit. There's the fruit inside the shell, whatever shell it may be, the peel of an apple, the peel of an orange, or the shell of a nut. Every fruit, well, nut is not a fruit, but has a peel around it. Well, it could be an egg, the eggshell. So the Shalom explains, using that example, that in the beginning of creation, the world, the physical world, was like a klipa that kodma lepri. It preceded the fruit. Meaning, it's the first thing you see when you see the fruit. You don't see fruit, you see the peel. Now, if you misunderstand, you could say maybe the peel is the main thing. You don't even open it up, and you don't find the fruit. But the whole peel is there to be shemer lepri. It's meant to be a protection. But like I said before with the tzimtzum, when there's a concealment and you don't understand what the concealment is, and it becomes an end in itself, that can be a big problem. Same thing this. The klipa is meant to protect the fruit. So it precedes the fruit. It's like surrounds it. But bottom line is, if you don't know there's a fruit inside and you give more credence and value to the klipa, that's like somebody giving more value to their work. Even though work and the money you make is only a means to be able to do Torah mitzvahs, then klipa starts becoming a power of its own. Like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, in Pedig Vov and Pedig Vov and Zayin, when he speaks about klipa snega, you're eating a meal, but you forget that this meal is coming from Hashem, and this meal is supposed to give you strength to be able to learn Torah and do mitzvahs. You're eating because you want to satisfy your hunger. So klipa snega now, l'shah, temporarily becomes like shalosh klipa because you're not using it for kedusha, especially if you indulge in it. So the meal itself is not a bad thing. The meal is meant to be a means to an end, like the peel of a fruit that's meant to protect the fruit. But if you don't see it that way, then it becomes a power of its own. So he's using that example here. So it's klipa kodma lepri. So why was there a klipa created? In order to protect, but you have to see it as a means to an end. So he's saying basically this klipa is getting its energy in the field of a shvira because it's not meant to be an end in itself. That's not why God created a peel. There should be a peel. It was meant to be a peel to protect a fruit. I think that's how he's explaining klipa kodma lepri. Ukamaimer, my timer is a masge beresha. Okay, that's a Gemara that talks about what is greater, as a goat or a kifsa or a sheep. So Chassidus is a whole maimer Chassidus. The Rebbe Rashab is being very brief here, so I have to elaborate. So it talks about what is the difference between a goat and a sheep is two different levels. One is, I think one is, let me look it up. I may have it here. Let me see here. It's a maimer from the Tzemach Tzedek, and it's a maimer from the Rebbe Rashab as well. Trying to remember the details. So when I think the story is like this, maybe it's a story with Yaakov and Esau when he brought him when he gave him the bribe, Pasha Vayishlach, when he bribed him, when he appeased him, I should say. First, I think Let me look it up so we'll get it clear. 1 second. I have it right here in front of me. Here we are. Yeah. So it's talking like this. The Gemara talks about that king and queen were sitting, and they were saying either Gadya Yai, Gadya is a goat, and he said Imri Yai, which is preferable, the goat or the sheep? And they continued and said that the conclusion is that the karbanas that were brought in the Beis Hamikdash, that kvasim kedmim leizim, that the sheep would preceded the goats, but then he goes back and says, but we find in other places that they're equal. So there, I think he said, let me just see here. 1 second. The truth is, I probably have to look more into it. I don't see all the details there. But if I recall correctly, it's similar to Klippa Kodma Lepri, like he says here, Gadya Kodma, the expression here is, what does he say? Ize Masge Beresha, that the goat was preceded first, not because it's more superior, but because it's like the Klippa that precedes the fruit, the shell that precedes the fruit. I believe that's what he's saying.
The Gemara is saying here that Rabbi Zera found Rabbi Yehuda. He was standing at the door of his father-in-law, and he saw that Rabbi Yehuda is in a good mood, answered everything. So Rabbi Zera asked him, Esau is ready to answer anything. He asked him, "My time is a maskon bereisha v'hadar imrei." Why the goats are going before them? So he said, "Kivrei yoshei shel olam, bereisha chasheicho v'hadar ne'ira."
Yeah, exactly. That first comes cheshech and then comes oir. So even though the kavan is oir, light, but you begin like first comes the klippa, the shell, then comes the fruit.
He said that the goats, most of them are black. And
right. Yeah. I connected it to the Gemara here because somewhere I think Chassidus explains it that way. Okay, good. That's correct. So bottom line is that you see from this that the darkness precedes the light, which means that that's how they're receiving their energy. The word hahu, b'yemahu. So you see again, hu is all nister, which means it's concealed. So the concealment, b'yemahu, is anechi asta pone, I concealed and concealed my face on that day. B'yemahu, the level of hu. Shaydei hester zeh, shebebchinis hahu, through this concealment, with the level of hahu, yemahu, nimshach lehem yanika. From there, they get their energy. Mashenkim b'china zeh. Zeh, when you say who, you say like we spoke. Lashon nister is like the third person. It's like it's a concealed state. Person's not there. You say him. Not there. Zeh is means you see it straight. Zeh, you're pointing to it. That's called loshen nechach. It's present. So there, that's already a gili. So zeh is gili. Who is nister? So even though we learned earlier that nister could be in kedusha in lateva, here we're talking about the who lera, the clip, the makif that is concealed, and therefore allows for the negative energy to emerge. Ulechein Omar Esau, and that's why Esau said, Lama li zeh. Why do I need this? Why do you use the word zeh? Because mishum the bechina zu efshar le'linak. He didn't want the level of zeh because from zeh he cannot draw energy. Esau was drawing energy. Esau is gvura, obviously, but gvura is cautious, meaning from the negative side. Zeh is a threat to him. See, that's why he said lama li zeh. The word zeh.
Lama zeh is a parsha. Lama li zeh b'toiro.
Yeah. It's in Parshas.
This parsha for this week.
Tildus. Okay. Yeah. Because but for this level, he cannot draw energy. V'harizal derech shamer pare im benhu. Tal derech when Pare said, when he decreed that if a male child is born, you should throw him into the river Nile because the threat of not wanting to be challenged by a boy that would grow into becoming a savior for the Jewish people. So it says, what was the problem with Ben? Why a Ben and Basi wasn't threatened by a daughter?
Ben who?
In Ben who, yeah. Because that's a level of Gili Eir. You talk about, I think the diuk there is not who necessarily, maybe the diuk is Ben. Because who is Nister? He says because it's Gili Eir v'ef shalalinak. And he could not draw energy from that. So it was a threat to him. Abbas is more concealed state. Sometimes you say Ben is chesed and Bas is gvura. That's what Pashtus what he's saying. The Gam, then he's medayik. The Gam, another additional point is the Mebchina Zu Nimsha Mebchinas HaPenimiyus Dafke. That from this level is Dafke Penimiyus HaMakif. The Penimiyus. Well, he doesn't say Makif. Sorry, let me correct that. It doesn't say, it just says Penimiyus. So from Penimiyus, obviously, he wants the Makif. The bottom line is that any negative energy, where do they dwell? They don't go in a place where there's a lot of security and there's a lot of protection and someone watching. Because that's Gili. Why do thieves work in the night? Very simple. Because when the light is shining, it's always more difficult to be successful. They have to work in the night. I'm talking about even physically. And the same thing is psychologically. They work undercover. Because wherever something is revealed, like I mentioned, infections fester when there's no real protection. When the light is shining, when it's very warm or very bright, it's usually not conducive for negative forces to take hold. Okay. Let me stop for any questions.
Yeah, I have a question about the Hey Gavorus and Hey Chasadim. It seems like that this is dealing with the primordial flow of godliness is Chesed, and then Gvura is a Tzimtzum on the flow of godliness. Whereas, like I just heard a talk you gave about Yishmael and Yitzhak is Gvura, Yishmael is Chesed. So where we speak about the clip of Chesed, say from Yishmael, that's a different level. That's not the Hey Gevurah and Hey Chasadim that we're talking, which is all godliness. One is a constriction of godliness and one is a flow of godliness, whereas Yitzhak and Yishmael is a manifestation of that, but in a lower level where you're taught where the flow of Chesed is not just flow of godliness, but it's a flow of the meat of Chesed, which can be a klippa. Is that?
He's not discussing that here at all. we spoke about it on Friday. The chesed of Yishmael, which is chesed of L'umazeh of Avram. Avram was chesed, and Yotzim Memenu Yishmael. So Yishmael is like an extreme form of chesed of Avram without the balance of Gvura. He's not discussing here at all. He's not talking about the L'umazeh of chesed. Here he's talking about...
He went away from him. Yotza Mimenu Yishmael.
Yeah, but Chassidus teaches Yotza came out of chesed of Avram, came chesed of Yishmael. Yotza Menu, like Yotza v'nifrad. So it's a nishtal, meaning that he's not discussing chesed here, l'umazeh at all. Here he's discussing hey chsadim, hey gvuras of kedusha. But from that nishtalshul emerges the klippas that he says from the yenikas achitzenim from gvura. So it's a whole other discussion, the difference between Esau, who's gvura of l'umazeh, Ishmael's chesed of l'umazeh. Yeah, Yitzchak is Gvura of Gedusha, Avram is Chesed of Gedusha, Yaakov is Teferes. It's a whole other discussion, doesn't really belong here at all. It's a good discussion, but it's not relevant to our conversation here. Here is primarily the point is that Gvura is the root, that when there's enough concealment, it can lead to this darkness that is allows for the klippa to emerge.
Right, because when he said earlier, well, bechinas hachasadim game biribo yishtalshus hakol hu bechinas tov. So that obviously is not talking about Yishmael.
So I explained that he's not. There is the element where there's too much chesed and no breaks, so to speak. Like let's think of a flood. When it rains, rain is chesed, but if it just doesn't stop raining, it becomes a mabel. So he's not just talking about what does it mean, Eidem Misav. I explained it on Friday that it means that chesed itself, love itself, is always a positive, and even when it's nishtalshul, it doesn't get coarse. However, in other places it discusses that it could create a problem, but he's not addressing that here. It's not relevant to the concept here because real klippa comes from gvura. Bottom line, even chesed of Yishmael ultimately is due to the concealment of something. Because if Avram's chesed was completely revealed, then Yishmael should have been like Avram. Mm-hmm. What happened? Why did he end up being a chesed without that became a chesed that is l'umazeh? So it deserves its own. There, it's already love that becomes arrogance. Mm-hmm. So you could say either there is an element of gvura there, or something that he's not addressing here. It's a good question, and it's a good qualification, but he's just not talking about that here. What should I say?
Uh-huh. Okay. So the clip of chesed that we see in the world is still coming from gvura. Ultimately, it's coming from concealment.
That's one way I would explain it. Not necessarily the only way to explain it. It could also be when the light is too intense and there's no filter. It could also create problems, as we know. Chesed without gvura also has a problem. It's like when you spoil someone that way, and sometimes you need the discipline. When Sarah told Avram to send away Yishmael, she was basically saying we need gvura, and sending him away will actually be for his favor. In other words, when a child needs discipline, just to show them chesed is not necessarily a positive. So I think the way to explain it is that chesed itself can cause a problem, but it doesn't mean chesed itself is the root of the problem. The root of the problem is ultimately that it's not being done the right way. With gvura, the concealment itself becomes the root of the issue because the concealment can be misunderstood. Mm. So, as I said, it's a good discussion. It's not directly relevant, but it's good to distinguish because he is saying that chesed, even with ribu ishtalshlus, ends up not being misav, doesn't get thickened, doesn't get coarse. I mean, I also pointed out what the Rebbe said a number of times. Too much love, even if it's more than should be given, is never going to create the same damage as too much gvura. If you show too much discipline, can create real destruction. Too much chesed can spoil someone and can suffocate them and can, when you give too much love and you don't have any measures and any regulators, it's like the gas without brakes. But at the end of the day, it's still love. It's just too much of it. Whereas Gvura, when you withhold, if you withhold too much, that can create a real destruction. That's ultimately how I would ultimately explain it. But you could elaborate more on it. I'm sure there's more to say on it. I mean, that's why the clip of Yishmael was in some ways never as intense as the clip of Esau. It says in Chassidus as well. I think we learned about it, actually. I think we learned about it earlier. Now that you mention it, interesting. I think, let me see something. I think he said something what I just said earlier. Maybe not positive. Let me see. Yeah. Interesting. So he's talking about Yishmael. I don't know about Yishmael, but he definitely talks about Esau. If you look on page 1334, 1335, we keep talking, it jogged my memory. I think he talks mamish about this. Mamish, I mean, definitely something about this. He definitely talks about Yitzchak and about Esau. Yeah. So big arich is different in chsadim and gvuras. Let me just quickly see if there's something.
I don't know if he's talking there about the Klita point. He's talking there about Asodim and Gvuras in Kedusha.
Yeah, but go to the next page. Go to the next page.
Because in Klita, look what Chesed, the Klita, Ishmael, it makes them feel more ani ve'afsioid. Look what the Arabs are doing today. Then Sefer Daniel is saying that will be the last step before Mashiach, that the Arabs will like to take over even the Western world, and then Mashiach will come.
I didn't say it's not a klipa. We know Chesed Elumazeh is Yishmael. I'm just distinguishing between the two. Maybe let me look into it more before I respond properly, because I see it's a whole topic. Let me see what I come back with. As I said, it's a good question and deserves a good answer. I know something intuitively tells me that even the greatest. Listen, in Torah, Yishmael did tshuva at the end of yesterday's parsha. Esau is a whole other story. So the Alter Rebbe also says that the golus of Yishmael was never as harsh as the golus of Esau. Despite what is going on today, I'm not in any way trying to minimize what. Just for the record, you also know that Esau married the daughter of Yishmael. So the Abarbanel says that all the problems we have is because of that marriage. So it's not just Esau alone or Yishmael alone, it's Yishmael marrying the daughter of Esau, then you got yourself real problems. So there you have Chesed Delumazeh plus Gvura Delumazeh. So maybe that's also relevant here.
Wow.
Let me look it up. Let me see what I find. And I'll come back. As I said, it's a good discussion.
There is a Orach Chaim in Chomesh Vayikro that he's describing the Golus from Yishmael in very strong words, how bad it is.
Yeah.
He was in the Golus Yishmael. Morocco. It's not a contradiction to what you said.
Yeah, I know. I understand. And I'm not. Listen, Yishmael, because I told you, Sarah told Avram to send away Yishmael, and he had to send him away. So it's not a question of, the question is, what does he mean by these words that with Chesed, what we're running here, that Chesed, even Rachel Riba Yishtalshalus, Hakol Hu B'chinas Tev B'shum Deira Chesed Eine Mesave from the Migdash Melech. So how do you explain chesed uluma hazeh based on that line? That's the question on the table here. So let me look a little more into it and let me see. Okay, Eliezer, is that fine? Is that fair? I gave my initial thoughts on it, but I'd like to be, research it further. Okay.
Coming back to 5 fingers of the right hand and 5 fingers on the left, and how both of them should be working for a good reason. Did we stop talking about that, or we have to continue investigate how the right hand and the left hand supposed to be for good? I know the next level.
He didn't
Yeah.
discuss that here. He didn't discuss that here. Here, so far, what he's saying is he's trying to explain why there's a hu l'ra.
Yeah.
He's talking about the negative force, the negative side of the gvuras, how the gvuras lead to something negative. I don't know if he's going to go back to the positive side of gvuras. We'll see. I'm not sure.
Can you
He's
explain
continuing
that?
to explain the who in the negative side. That's the key here. Okay.
Okay.
Can you
The
explain that?
Sorry. The F Shalemer. You want to? Any other questions? Anybody else? Okay. The F Shalemer. Continue reading inside. 6 lines from the bottom. 7 lines from the bottom. Talking about Nimrod. Remember, Nimrod is the first who. So Zeu Shekosa b'Nimrod Gibur Tzayid Lifnei Havaya. He was a powerful hunter before God. So he's not being medayik. What means Lifnei Havaya? Lifnei Havaya dafke al derech im takbi kenesher. Lifnei Havaya doesn't just mean before God. It means Lifnei in the level where God is beyond revelation. Lifnei Hashem. Like it says, im takbi kenesher. Someone rises himself up like an eagle. So then, Misham Yeridu, the expression is, Linak mebchinas dekamech kechashech ke'era. So it's like a form of like arrogance, you could say, but even not without arrogance. Im takbi kenesher, because Nimrod wanted to go not to like Pari and all the negative forces. They don't want to go to a place of revelation. They want to go to a place where they can benefit from. Linek, in order to draw energy from the level where darkness and light are equal. Because where light is more powerful, a negative force of darkness will not be able to gain too much energy. So Lifnei Hashem, he's referring to Lifnei Hashem before the level of Gili, level of Makif, that is Chashecha Ke'era, where darkness and light are like one. So basically, all this is an explanation of how who, the level of Makif, can be the root and also source for the negative energies. Because in a sense, it's like remove where everything is equal. It's like an equalizer. Mamala Kalalmin is the divine energy that's revealed. But this level of Makif, but he's now going to qualify this level of who is only Chetzenius Makif. Ach kol zeh, however, all this that we just discussed, who mebchinas Chetzenius Makif, is the outer dimension of the Makif. So-called the Makif as it's like, in a sense where everything is equal. The Shamu Inyan Kama Erechapayim Lefonov. On that level, you say how much patience and how much tolerance he has. Ukachashech Ka'era. And where darkness and light can be equal. You know, sometimes you'll see this with parents, or sometimes in other situations, where the person, the parent, the lenient parent, the child does something wrong, and one parent says we should discipline the child. The other parent says, no, let him be, or let her be. Not getting in who's right or wrong, but the second approach is more of a lenient approach. That's coming from Chetzenius HaMakif. And Chashech Ke'era, in a place where darkness and light have a certain equanimity, a certain equality. That's Chetzenius. Ava b'chinas Penimiyus HaMakif. But when you go to the inner dimension, what the Elokus really wants in the inner dimension of the Makif, Shama kavanu b'chinas ha-Penimiyus dafke. There, even though it's a makif, the kavanah is there should be Penimiyus, not to allow any energy to spill over to the negative forces. You see, for example, just another example for this would be when someone is very magnanimous and they're giving. Let's say they're pouring wine. Whoever comes can get wine. So you'll see they pour so much that it starts spilling over. And when it spills over, where does it go to? To the ground. And all kinds of different forces, even negative ones, can eat off the scraps. That's Chetzenius HaMakif. But Penimiyus HaMakif is the kavanah is dafke Penimiyus. It shouldn't be gleaned from there any energy going to negative places. Ubebchinas hatev, Penimiyus and good. So there's no room for the ra, the negative, to receive energy there. Another example I'll give is, when say you're building a big mansion, a structure. There's a lot of materials necessary. So the contractor buys a lot of wood, for example. And then when he starts building the structure, some of the wood is excess. So excess, you throw out, or you leave it on the sides, or wherever it may be, and anybody can come and take it. But then the owner of the home, the one who's paying for it all, comes and sees all this excess, and he says to the contractor, "Why are you just throwing it out? It's valuable." So he said, "It's nothing. What is it compared to the structure?" So we have some extra. But the person who really cares most is the Penimiyus HaMakif. Everything is precise. There's no such thing as excess that anybody can just take it. I'm just giving a simple example. So Penimiyus HaMakif really cares. It's a makif because it's a higher level than mamal kalam and that immersion. But there, the kavanah is very clear. And then there's no room for any unikas ha-chetzenim. It's the Chetzenius HaMakif that allows for that. Va'adrabah, on the contrary, on that level, Penimiyus HaMakif, misham hu d'chol eivecha yicharesu. From there, the level is kol eivecha. All your enemies will be cut off. That Chassidus explains is coming from a very high level, because there's no room for any eivecha, for any enemy. An enemy can thrive where there's a certain element of aloofness and we're not noticing everything, like Chetzenius HaMakif. But in Penimiyus HaMakif, no. V'zeu v'ei v'Yaakov dafke. And that's what the pasuk says. So the pasuk says, like he's going to bring as haloyas ach Esau Yaakov. Esau was a brother to Yaakov. So based on that, they should both be equal. Yet the pasuk says, v'ei v'Yaakov dafke. Hashem dafke loved Yaakov. So the Rebbe Rashab explains, Gam b'bchina zu, also in that very level, the haloy ach Esau Yaakov, isn't Esau a brother of Yaakov? On that very level where they're brothers, and there's a certain mitzad Chetzenius HaMakif in equality, and dafka that level, he says, no, I love Yaakov specifically. So it's not that Yaakov is loved on a lower level. On the very level of Makif, the difference is between Chetzenius Makif and Penimiyus Makif. The Hainu now explains at what level it is above. The Eidei Sof Shalamayla Mishtalshlus. When we're talking about Eidei Sof, that's higher than Ishtalshlus. Because in Ishtalshlus, you're talking Mamal Kalalman, that's the divine energy, the Penimiyus. Lamayla Mishtalshlus is Seviv, Makif. Ushalamayla Mabchinas Teyu V'Tikun. And the level that's higher than Teyu and Tikun, the Sham Esav Yaakov Hem B'Bchinas Achim. So with this Teyu and Tikun, they have a certain equality because they're brothers. They're twins. In B'Bchinas HaPenimiyus, in the level of the Penimiyus of Eidei Sof, that's higher than Ishtalshlus, not Chetzenius. Penimiyus, v'Oyev is Yaakov Dafke. Yaakov is the one that's chosen. So it's like what the Maimon Chazal says. I don't know if he's going to bring it here. There's a Maimon Chazal says, "Any Adeya." There's my saying, "Ezem Chofetz." My saying shall tzaddikim, my saying shall rishoyim. There's a level. The Medrash says doesn't know what does he prefer, the actions of tzaddikim or those of the wicked. So the commentaries all explain what that means. Some say it means, does he prefer tzaddikim or tshuva? But the simple interpretation that there's a level where tzaddikim and rishayim seem to be equal. And then he says, Chaf is dafka masen shel tzaddikim. In that very level where they could be equal, he chooses one. He chooses the tzaddikim. In other words, there's the divine as it relates to a structure of existence. There's very clear what is right and what is wrong. But then there's a level where there's a certain, like we say, im tzadakta matifol bay. It's a level where he's beyond right and wrong even, but beyond darkness and light. And yet, the Penimiyus Makif dictates he wants dafka the light, dafka the good. That's essentially what he's saying here in this whole discussion. I understand the question is the obvious question. Well, how could that be that Makif of Elikus should be indifferent to what is right and what is wrong? So this goes back to the Tzimtzum. It goes back that God created it that way, that there should be ability to be two forces. Because if you don't have the ability for Zelu Umazeh, you have no free will. So therefore, the Tzimtzum creates a situation where there's space and there's room for independence. The Chetzenius HaMakiv allows for energy to go also to the negative energy, to the negative forces. So essentially, they're getting their Yonika from two places, from the Gvuris, the Tzimtzum, and from the Makif, Chetzenius HaMakiv. And then the ultimate goal is that we should access the Penimiyus HaMakiv and draw down what God really wants. That even in a world where there is a certain equality to two paths in our life, that you have two choices, Nefesh Elikis, Nefesh Habamis, the path of life, the path of the opposite, good or evil, that we there itself, on that very level, we should choose, because what a God really wants is Dafka Tev. So the Makif is a certain element that is beyond existence. So one side of it is that it allows for room that should be a hu, l'ra, for the negative. But even there, ultimate goal is to achieve the hu, l'teva, the Makif that leads to good.
Rabbi, but didn't Yitzhak love Esau because he knew that in the root he had a certain power that Yaakov didn't have?
In the root, yeah. In the root, but not in actuality down below. And
So
indeed,
would that
there is something that even Mashiach comes, the power of Esau, the root of the Gvuras, where it ultimately comes from, will be revealed, but not in the time when Esau lived. It didn't actualize. Yitzchak saw in Esau what he's capable of, or what the future holds, or where he's rooted, but not in actuality. He was not. That's why Rivka saw it the way it was, not just what could be. So,
right.
So that's like Rabbi Akiva saw, even in the destruction of the temple, he saw the future that it would bring. But destruction is still destruction.
Right.
So there's two aspects here. Correct. The problem is that Esau did wreak havoc and destruction in the world. So that's what we're addressing: what he is, not what he could be.
Yeah, it's interesting how the women, really were like the concrete. Sarah made,
Yeah.
Ishmael.
I always say when it comes to children, always defer to the mother, not to the father. If there's a difference in opinion, especially when you're talking about women of this caliber. Well, with Rivka, it's even deeper because Esau was her natural son. With Yishmael, you could say it was not Sarah's son, but still, Sarah was a tzaddikus. She was not interested in hurting Yishmael or Hagar. She just understood. I mean, it's like today. If you don't discipline and you don't show strength to the enemy, you end up not having peace. It's the strength, the gevura that she showed that actually brought Yishmael back. I spoke about it last Sunday, that you see in the Parsha Chayesara, the end is when Yishmael returns and does tshuva. So, and it's in the chapter of Sarah, and it was Sarah that actually led that to happen, because she was the one that was wise enough, that knew that if you don't discipline Yishmael now, we're going to have more problems. If you discipline him now, he'll ultimately return, and we will make peace.
Absolutely. Interesting.
So discipline is not always a negative, if it's done right.
No, totally. It's we lack it, and it's part of the problem we have in society today. Nobody wants to take responsibility and do it. And Rivka even went a step further because she said she'll take it on herself, whatever, she really said she would take the din on herself, for the deception, right?
Yep. Right. Okay.
I took a notice Sarah's name.
I know
up
the
here.
temptation here is very strong to connect it all to events of today with what's going on in the Middle East. And there's no question there's connection. It's just that I find it interesting. There are other Maimorim actually that talk much more in the direction that we would like to discuss. What is the difference between Yishmael and Esau, and how did they come to be, and what's the tikkun, how do you repair them, etc. It's just that here he's really not going in that direction. Here he's focusing more on how the Gvuras ultimately lead to something negative, but ultimately we want to go back to the root of it all, where Yaakov is Yaakov over Esau. So I see the overlap and the connection, but the fact is, I just want to stick to what he's saying here. I don't want to go.
No, totally. So in the end, Yaakov is still loved more, right?
Yes, because Yaakov is like the neshama and Esau is like the guf, the body.
Mm-hmm.
So though the body has tremendous power, but a body without being harnessed by the soul can create tremendous problems. So we have to keep that in mind. That's the key. Ultimately, the Gevurah of Esau will be transformed, but that's not what we're addressing here. We actually addressed that earlier, what I referred to, that the Gevuras themselves will be sweetened, if you remember. That's the transformation of the Gevurah. Here we're not talking about transforming the Gevurah. We're talking here more the Hey Lera. We're talking more who is really the topic here, to be honest. Seva Bamala and Etzem in regard to transforming. But we will talk about the transformation of the animal soul ultimately. So we'll get there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
These two levels in Makif, Chatzonius and Penimiyus, it seems like a parent might have children and they say, well, we love all our children the same, but we more respect or admire the choices that one child made and the accomplishments in righteousness that one child made or not. But it would seem like and the Shorish, the love of a parent to a child is that would seem like the Penimiyus level, the deepest level. You know what? They're all my children. Okay, so I concealed things so I could have free choice, and then one made not the proper choices, but I still love them the same because they're all my children. Which would seem to be the opposite of what the Rebbe is saying here. Or I think the Penimiyus, Makif, there should be Chasheka Ko'ora, whereas the Chatzonius Makif would be where you'd make the distinctions between their achievements in righteousness.
Okay, that's a good question. I'll answer it this way. I think we have to, if you really want to go through all the levels, I would start like this. From the Etzem Atzmus, which is higher than Makif and Penimi, even Chatzonius Makif. Atzmus, everything is equal. That's like you just said, a parent, doesn't matter what their child doesn't do. There's the Atzmus, Moyach Ha'av, every child comes from the Etzem. Every child is loved, the Etzem. And then come the levels we're talking about here. Once you get into Makif and Primi, you're already talking levels, not the Atzmus. So Atzmus would be what you just described. That's beyond Chashech and Eira altogether. That's not just equal light and dark. That's because in Etzem, everything it's beyond the structure altogether. So everything, like Atzmus, like Etzem and Neshama. But then the fact is, God gave us a Torah and mitzvahs, and this Torah mitzvahs is not optional. He wants us to follow them. That's also negating the Etzem. So the Penimiyus HaMakif reflects God's innermost desire, what he wants his children to look like. And that's not arbitrary or optional. It's not just a Chesenizdika thing. That's why there's a thing called a tzaddik. There's a Moshe Rabbeinu. Kairach wanted to be like Moshe. No, you're not Moshe. But Kairach could argue, what do you mean? We all come from the same etzem. Madua tisnasu, kol ha'edek deshimim. We're all holy. No, that's not correct. We all come from the same etzem, but we're not all holy in the equal level. A teacher is not a student. The student will say, I learned the chassidus that you, my teacher, My Rebbe is just like I am. We both come from the same etzem. So why do I have to respect you? Why don't you listen to me? Everyone understands the problem with that. Not just from a respect point of view. Because the same God also created structure. And he said, I have preferences. Not just preference. This is a mitzvah. Avodah Zarah is not, is Yarag V'Yavi. You have to die before you bow or worship or an idol. You don't say, oh, in the etzem, what difference does it make? It's all equal. We're all children are equal. Who cares if he does dins Avodah Zarah or not? There's true discretion and true choices. So that's also again the etzem. The Eibishter wants these mitzvahs and doesn't want these avedas. And that's not just an external thing. That's Penimiyus HaMakif reflects that. So that's why there, Dafke Yaakov, because Yaakov chose the path. Esau could have. He had free will. Esau, his etzem, Esau's la'ased lavei, will reveal the etzem of everything. But in practice, so that's Penimiyus HaMakif. Then comes another level of Elikus. Elikus as it comes down to Chetzenius HaMakif. Here, you're talking about an operative mechanism that God put into place where there'll be a certain indifference, so to speak. But that's not an indifference of Atzmus, where everything is, be'etzem, everything is one. Here it's an indifference in the world of Makif that is not really the Kavanah that way. It's a level that allows energy to go to Esau and to Yaakov, and there they are, brothers. Not beside the etzem, but in the world of Makifim. So that's like the Chetzenius HaMakif. And then comes Penimiyus. Penimiyus is very much like Penimiyus HaMakif. Now the energy, who is the energy actually going to? So in Kedusha, Hashem will give energy directly, like he says in Tanya, and to Sitra Achra, he'll give it throwing it over his back from B'chinas Acharayim. So bottom line is, the negative forces, let's say Esau, at the end of the day, is getting energy from Chetzenius HaMakif and from the Tzimtzumim in the world of Penimiyus, from a very concealed state. But in the Etzem, yes, there's equal, and Penimiyus HaMakif, they're not equal, for the reasons I just explained. So in other words, bottom line is, there's like two things. There's Etzem, where everything is equal, but it's not, we accept because the Esau's cruelty or wickedness, it's just because in Etzem, everything is in Etzem. And in Penimiyus HaMakif makes it very clear, that's not what we want. That's not what Hashem wants. Hashem wants Dafka Vedas at Tzadikim, or else the whole Torah falls apart. If you start saying, hey, you know what? All we got to do is go one more step up. Look, the Jews built a golden calf. Moshe Rabbeinu went on the mountain, got forgiveness. So let's just go build golden calves, because we always have a back door to do tshuva and gain forgiveness on Yom Kippur. I don't think anyone will suggest such a thing, for many reasons. So there is a kavanah here that needs to be fulfilled. That's how I would respond to your question.
And it all goes back to Gevurah, because if you don't restrain yourself, then you will have that attitude that you can always go back to Yom Kippur, right?
Well, that's another side. That's how we have to, of course, that we need our discipline. I was talking more God's Gevurah, from God's point of view, which is like a tzimtzum and so on. Yeah, I mean...
Can you explain that in the parentheses a little higher up about Vayfatuhu b'fihem u'bilshonam yichazvu, and it says v'hainu shehagam sherak
יחזבו לו, ובלשונם יחזבו לוי.
Okay, and then it says v'hainu shehagam sherak vayfatuhu b'fihem, even though that's all they did. Is that what he's saying? Even though all they did was vayfatuhu b'fihem?
Yeah, I didn't stop on that word. You could say two things here. I want to see the pasuk actually inside. What he wants to say is that even if they didn't do, you could say the gam can mean two things. Even if they only do that, they didn't do anything more, but they didn't do tshuva. They did a negative thing, so still. Or you can mean gam, that even if they did that alone, and without tshuva, there's still the hu rachim yechaper. That's for sure what he wants to say. He wants to say the hu rachim is not due to tshuva. It's even when there's a negative thing that was done. So I'm not sure. The gam could be interpreted two ways.
And rak, sharak.
Yeah, let me just see it inside. Let me see a second. Shagam sharak, we have to. Yeah, right. I'm sorry, sharak. The rak can be interpreted two ways. That though they only did v'yaftu b'fiyim, meaning nothing more, but they also didn't do tshuva, because he says clearly, and gam b'lei tshuva.
How do we seduce
Or you could
God?
say
What does
that
mean?
even a little thing like that is also so-called forgiven, or overlooked would be the right word.
What is this referring to? Because I think that whole parak is referring to the 40 Masas and the Midbar and all the stuff that the Jewish people did there. So what is this referring to? Vayfatuhu b'fihim even.
I'd have to look inside. Do you have, if you have it open in front of you, it's what pasuk is it? It's I think it's in
Perek
Tehillim.
Ayin Ches.
Ayin Ches?
Yeah, in Tehillim.
Yeah, it's in Tehillim. That I know. It's in Tehillim. I'd have to look up the context. I don't remember right now.
He's saying there are all kind of things that the negative things, what he did. After that, he's saying, "V'libom loy nochoin imoi, v'loy nemnu bivrisoi, v'hu rachom yechaper."
Yeah. I'm looking right now. Let's see inside. Yeah, he's talking about their, yeah. Okay. They asiru. Talking about their sins. Okay, so yeah.
B'chol zayis chotu oid, v'loy ha'aminu b'nifle Esau.
So sad.
Bigwile, that's the word he teaches VF2, who he says bigwile, like fooled him. They lied to him. The libam le'nochin imoy v'lei nemanu bebrisei. But he is merciful, he expiates iniquity, does not destroy.
Vayizkoyer ki vosal heimo, after v'urachum. He remembers the only blood and flesh. He's including this parak with good things about them.
So, bottom line is, the V'hu Racham is not coming with a condition of tshuva. That's the key point here. Again, the Ra could be only that, or even that. Either way, you can touch it that way. Okay. I think we'll stop here. Let me see.
What could it mean that they fatuhu?
So let me just say one more thing here. Go ahead. What were you asking? What does what mean?
What could it mean that the Jewish people yifatu Hashem?
What did you never heard Jews do something wrong in their life?
To beguile and to seduce Hashem?
They try. Then they actually do it. They try. They try to fool. They try to manipulate. They sin against God, So let me say one more thing, I think, and then we'll stop here. I wanted to say is this. What we're touching upon here is also a very fundamental concept. How much is God involved, and how high levels of godliness engage with us in our existence? Because you could argue, and probably some do, that our relationship with God is more or less on our terms. In other words, the real deep levels of atzmos, completely beyond everything. God created existence and definitely engages with it through 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 divine energy that manifests within existence. And maybe we could reach a little higher. That doesn't mean it's not high levels of the divine, but you're not really engaging with God on God's terms. The key thing that we have to keep in mind here is that when God wants mitzvahs, it's not just, okay, I created servants, mortal human beings who are inferior to me, to God that is, and I gave them rules and follow the rules. If you really ask me, be'etzem, does it make a difference to me whether they follow or they don't follow? Maybe yeah, maybe not. Or maybe not, because God is beyond it all. Like we say, Im sadakta matifol bay. If you do kindness, what difference does it make then? What effect does it have? But Chassidus makes it very clear, based, of course, on Kabbalah and based on many, many sources, that when we say God cares about us and God cares about our behavior, Nesava Kadosh Baruch Hu is not in Giluyim, it's in Atzmus. That Atzmus himself desire, however you explain that word desire, and desire is higher than Seichel, as the Alter Rebbe, is higher than reasoning. There's no reason. Taiva is higher than Atam, as the Alter Rebbe says. And even on that deepest level, God said, this is what I want. Mitzvahs are not optional, even there. So even where everything you can say seems to be completely equal because God is beyond everything, there, yes, it's negei be'etzem, a nefesh. How are you going to behave? And then there are the levels we spoke about, Penimiyus Makif, that translates to Penimiyus Makif, and Chetzenis Makif, where there is a certain indifference, but that's not fundamentally where it comes from. The higher, you'd think the higher you go, the more indifferent God would be. And here's the opposite. The higher you go, the more he cares. However, he cares on his terms. Obviously, it's not the way we understand caring. Mamala Kalaman is God cares about us on our terms. That we relate, because Erdana, God relates to us, Yedeya, he engages with us. Sevav Kalaman, God is beyond us. And Atzmus, God cares, but he cares the way Atzmus cares, not like Sevav or Mamala. So I just wanted to put that into the picture to really understand where this is going, because that's going to be the ultimate theme of Ayin Beis, the merging of all three that I just described. The
Which means higher than Seven. Atmos care.
Correct. Yeah. Or you could say in Sevav it's Penimiyus HaMakiv, which ultimately is rooted in the Helama Atzmi, as we're going to learn in Yaakov. So there's Penimiyus HaMakiv and Chetzenis HaMakiv. In a way, you could say is Atzmus Ein Sof and Makiv. Is Chetzenis HaMakiv is like is Sevav, lower level, and we'll discuss that as well, because the question is whether who is Atzmus or who is Sevav. It's mashma who is Sevav, but earlier when we learned Isha and Einai and the Ayin, he was only talking about two levels, the Eris and Kalim and Atzma Er. But when you break it down, it's really three. I just described almost four. Atzmus, Penimiyus HaMakiv, Chetzenis HaMakiv, Mamala. But Penimiyus HaMakiv and Atzmus are obviously, Penimiyus HaMakiv reflects Atzmus in a level that is already some manifest. We'll call it Helama Atzmi maybe. We'll discuss it more detailed in the next class. Yeah. So I hope that I think brings it all together in a way that makes a more structure to it all. Okay. So we'll stop here. We're at the bottom of page 1415. Again, dedicated to Rab Tzvi HaKoyen Kogan Hashem Yinkam Damei. And we'll stop here. Okay.